the question here that had been posed to me many times is, well, if it's tithe is still today, how come that how come Jesus didn't talk about it? Or they say that tithing was done away with the law. Well, I'm going to walk you through the scriptures, so bear with me for a moment. I'm just going to give you three different passages, and we're going to see what the word has to say about that topic. Is tithing for today, and did Jesus do away with it? In the book of Matthew, chapter 23, and you can write this down. If somebody can put it in the comments bar for everybody, that would be wonderful. In Matthew chapter 23, verse 23, very easy to remember, just in case your question. But in chapter 23, Jesus is exposing the Pharisaism and Sadduceeism that is in his day. He gives a big rebuke to the Pharisees and begins to call what we call balls and strikes. He begins to say, this is what you're doing is wrong. And he would say, you do this, but then you do that. And you do this good thing, but then you do that bad thing. And he starts, it's not a compliment, it's a correction. And through the whole thing, he's telling them, like, for instance, in verse 2, it says, the scribes and Pharisees seat themselves in the chair of Moses. Therefore, all that they tell you to do, you observe and you do according to their deeds. For they say things and do not do them. Do you see that? So they say things, but they do not do them. They tell you things, but they don't do them. They tell you the right things, but then they go do the wrong things. So he's setting the pace the way things are done. And in verse 23, he says this to them. He says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites, for you tithe mint and dill and cumming, which is all their produce, the things that they receive. In other words, you tithe what you receive. You tithe from what you receive, and you have neglected the weightier provisions of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. These are the things you should have done without neglecting the others. He says, you work so hard and you tithe on the things you're supposed to tithe on, but then you ignore the weightier things. You ignore those things that's Jesus talking. You're tithing, you should do that, but you're ignoring the other part. So Jesus there is declaring to the Pharisees, and he's talking to the teachers. Remember what I said. God rebukes in Malachi the priest for not teaching the tithe, not teaching how to give. And he says they're cursed because they're not receiving my blessing. That's a difference. Some people think when it says you're cursed with a curse, they think, it's like all of hell is going to break loose in their life. That's not what he's saying. He's saying you're cursed because you're not receiving my blessing. You're not receiving the opening of the windows of heaven and the blessing poured out not room enough to receive. You're not receiving, I'm rebuking the devourer for your sake. You're not receiving, I'm going to bless your family and your children and your job. You're not receiving. That's what he's saying. That's a curse. If you're not receiving from God, that is a curse. Let's come to grips with that. Amen. So that's Matthew 23:23. The next one I'd like you to put down on the comment is Hebrews chapter 7, verse 8. Because then it was said to me, okay, well, Jesus talked about it, but he wasn't crucified yet. By the crucifixion was the end of the abolishment of the law. Well, I taught on Sunday, as I was teaching on the book of Leviticus, and I shared in the book of Matthew, where Jesus said, not one jot or tittle of the law will be abolished till I come again. He makes that statement. He says, I didn't come to demolish the law or abolish the law. I came to fulfill the law. Fulfill the law. So now we find in Hebrews chapter 7, verse 8, Paul speaking over here, and he makes this statement, which I think is probably more blessed to hear than even the book of Malachi. I got to be honest with you. Just as two little passages. It says right here, and in this case, mortal man receives tithes, but in that case, one who receives them, of whom it is witnessed that he's alive. Here, mortal men receive tithe, but in heaven, mortal men who die receives tithe, but in heaven, the one who has the witness that he's alive receives the tithe. Well, who is that? The witness of the person who's alive in heaven, Jesus. So something supernatural takes place when I bring my tithe to my church, to my place here on earth. I bring 10% of gross revenues of what comes into my hands, and I give it to my church. Here, men that die are receiving it, but supernaturally, the tithe is being projected into heaven and going before the throne of God. And we find in Acts chapter 10, Cornelius, an angel says, your tithes have come up, your prayers and your alms have come up before God as a memorial. They go before God as a memorial. We find that Jacob was asleep and he sees a ladder set up that the top is in heaven and the bottom is on earth. And he says, I see angels of God bringing from men and taking to God, and taking from God and bringing to men. That's the reciprocity of giving. When you give, God receives it. The angels of God bring it up to heaven, and from heaven, God brings blessings down to earth. I mean, that's powerful. So watch what he says. He says, in this case, in here, mortal men receive tithes, but in heaven, one who receives them, who it is witness, he lives. And so to speak, through Abraham, even Levi, who received tithes, paid tithes, for he was still in the loins of his father when Melchizedek met him. So even Levi, inside Melchizedek, Levi came from Melchizedek or from Abraham. Inside him, he was paying tithe. I want you to get that. We're going to go to it right now in Genesis chapter 14. Abraham was alive 400 and roughly 70 years, 470 years before there was even a law, before the 10 Commandments, before the tablets, before the wilderness, before Moses. Abraham was alive 470 years before the law ever existed. And he says right here in Genesis chapter 14, and I'll tell you the story here in a minute, but he makes this statement, and I'm going to read from verse 17, but the key part is verse 20. So bear with me. So write down on the comment bar Genesis chapter 14, verse 17, 18, 19, and 20, or 17 through 20. I want you to write that down. Then I'm going to tell you what happened here. But the statement that says here in Genesis chapter 14, then after his return from the defeat of Chedorlaomer and the kings who were with him, the king of Sodom went out to meet him in the valley of Shiva, that is the king's valley. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, that's who he's talking about. Melchizedek, the king of Salem, went to the valley of the kings to meet Abraham after he defeated the kingdom of Chedorlaomer. Watch this. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. They came to celebrate of this great victory. Now he was a priest of God Most High. He was a priest to the God Most High. And he blessed him, and he said, blessed be Abraham of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hands. Watch this. And he gave him, Abraham, gave Melchizedek a tenth of all. He gave Melchizedek a tenth of all. Verse 21, let me give you a little caveat. And the king of Sodom said to Abraham, give the people to me and take the goods for yourself. And Abraham continued. He says, I'm giving you the tithe of everything else. Everything that I have. Yes, you gave it all to me. Here are the people, but I'm going to take 10% of everything that I have, and I'm going to give it to you. This was where the first statement of tithing was done. The word tithing or tithing becomes a noun, or excuse me, a verb. Tithing is a verb of a noun. The noun is a tenth. A tenth of everything that comes into your hands, you tithe and you give it to the Lord. And that's where Malachi now begins to make an establishment and says that you're going to bring a tenth of all that is received to him. I'm going to show you this. Let's go to Leviticus. Now go with me to Leviticus chapter 27. Come on now. Stay with me now. Thank you. Leviticus chapter 27. Put down on the bottom now, Mike. Thank you so much for doing this for me. Leviticus chapter 27, I'm going to give you verse 30, and we're going to do all the way to 33, okay? Leviticus 27, 30 to 33. You can actually go all the way up to 27, but we're going to focus on Leviticus 27, verse 30 through 33. And it says, now this is part of the law. It's not the law. It is not the law, but it's adopted. This blessing that came upon Abraham from Melchizedek falls upon us. Now God is giving it to us as a directive of how to receive a blessing and how to distinguish the difference between the tithe. And it says right here in Leviticus chapter 27, verse 30, thus all the tithe, a tenth, all the tenth of the land and of the seed and of the land of the fruit of the tree is the Lord's. It is holy to the Lord. If therefore a man wishes to redeem part of his tithe, he shall add to it 1/5. Wow. If you decide I'm going to keep the tithe, now you're in debt to God. You got to add, not only do you have to pay God that tithe, but you have to add to it 1/5. Let me tell you something. When he's talking about this, he's not talking about if you want to borrow it after you borrow it, then you pay back. I mean, you can. He's actually saying if you even think about borrowing it, you better go add it 1/5 to it. That's what he's actually saying. If you wish, see that word wish? If a man wishes to redeem part of the tithe, you need to add to it. He says, straighten your mind up. This thing needs to be to where you don't even think about tithing. Don't think about taking the tithe. You don't even want to think about taking the tithe. If you think about taking the tithe, you better add to it 1/5. He actually says it. That's what if you wish to do it. If you take it, yeah, you owe God that. But if you wish to do it, you still owe God that. He's saying, get your mind out of the gutter. Quit thinking about taking my tithe. Quit thinking about spending my tithe. That is holy, belongs to me because I want to bless you. The reason why I want you to tithe is because I want to bless you. Like the way Abraham was blessed from Melchizedek. God says, I want to bless you. I want to bless you that way and in a greater scale. Then he goes on and says this, verse 32. And for every 10th part of the herd and the flock, whatever passes under the rod, the 10th one shall be holy to the Lord. He is not to be concerned. I like this statement. He is not to be concerned whether it is good or bad. Don't be concerned. Well, it's not enough money. It's not. It's just a little. Oh, he was telling them, what the 10th one was leprous, or the 10th one was crippled. The 10th one was skinny. He says, don't worry about that. Don't worry about the quality of the 10th one. He says, don't be concerned whether it is good or bad, nor shall he exchange it. Don't try to exchange it. Or if he does exchange it, then both it and its substitute shall become holy. It shall not be redeemed. He says, don't think whether it's good or bad. You just give it all. Get your mind out of the gutter. Don't go thinking this thing that, well, I don't think this is good enough for God. I don't think I'm making enough money to tithe. The tithe is only $2. My tithe is only $18. And you're thinking that's not enough. Don't think about it. Just give it to God. If you think about it, he tells you, look, if they would say they would go and they'd count the sheep 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and those 9 sheep were fat and thick and rich with wool and all, and that 10th one was meagle and depleted and all, and the person would say, oh, pobrecito, this is not good enough for God, so let me go get the fat one. And he says, okay, now that fat one and that skinny one you have to give to God. He's saying, get your mind out of the gutter. Do not think that you will not tithe. Do not think that you will not do what God wants you to do. You have to do what God wants you to do. He wants you to do what he wants you to do. And some people, they get all caught up and they say to themselves, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can afford it. Yet you go to a restaurant and pay them 18%. I don't think I could pay my tithe to God. Yet you go and you pay your car payment. Oh, I don't know. I can't afford it. And you go pay your light bill. You say, I have more fear with the light company than I do my God. Let that rest in your heart just for a minute. Oh, I can't pay my tithe. I don't have the money to pay my tithe. I can't afford to pay my tithe. That happens all the time. Everybody's been challenged with that. I've been challenged with that before. Man, how can I do that? Here's what I've learned. If you pay it first, you don't even think about it. And you realize this is what your budget is. You see, you don't think about paying your FICA. Come on now. You don't think about paying your taxes. You don't think about it. You just got to do it. You do it out of fear of what? They're going to arrest you. They're going to take your house. They're going to take whatever. You have more fear of the IRS than you do of God. I want you to think about that for a second. And you have so much fear that you agreed with your boss because they made it convenient. You agreed with your boss to take out the tithe and pay it without me thinking about it. I want you to hear that. You see what I just said? You're thinking, well, I fear the IRS so much, I'm going to agree with my boss to take the taxes out of my salary to pay the IRS because I'm so afraid of the IRS, and I'm only going to look at what I got. And now you look at what you got, and God says, now give me tenth. And you say, oh my gosh, I can't afford to pay you. The preacher tells you got to tithe, and then you say, I can't afford to do that. Well, then you're cursed. Now, you're not cursed like you may think. It's not like God's going to put a spell on you. Nothing like that. Being cursed is lack of God's blessings. That's the best way to look at it. All he's saying is you are robbing from me the opportunity to bless you. That's what Malachi says. It says in verse 8, Malachi, write that down. Malachi chapter 3, verse 8. Will a man rob God? Yet you have robbed me. But you say, how have you robbed me? And he says, in tithes and offerings. He says, you're cursed with a curse, for you've robbed me, a whole nation of you. Bring the whole tithe to the storehouse, so that there may be food in my house. And he says, and test me in this, saith the Lord. I will open the windows of heaven for you. I'm going to pour out a blessing on you till it overflows. Then I'll rebuke the devourer for you, so that it will not destroy the fruits of your ground, nor the fruits of your vine shall fail to cast its grapes, saith the Lord of hosts. And all will call you blessed, and you'll be a delightsome land, saith the Lord. That's Malachi 4, verses 8 through 12. 7 blessings that come upon your life when you tithe. Number 1, open the windows of heaven. That's a blessing. Number 2, a pouring out of a blessing that there's not room enough to receive. Number 3, he rebukes the devourer. The devourer means the one who eats up your work, your income. Number 4, your fruits will not be destroyed. That means your job will be secure. Your income will be secure. Number 5, your fruits will bear forth in season. That means your children will be taken care of. Number 6, all nations will call you blessed. That means everywhere you go, people will speak well about you. And number 7, you'll be a delightful land. That means you'll be full of joy. You'll always be happy. Now, who doesn't want these blessings? Huh? Who doesn't want these 7 blessings? Windows of heaven open, poured out a blessing, not room enough to receive. He rebukes the devourer for us. The fruits of our ground are blessed. The fruit of our body are blessed. Everybody's going to speak well about you, and you'll be full of joy. Those are blessings. And if you don't have these, you are cursed. That's what God is talking about. God does not put a curse on you. Not having the blessings of God is the curse. That's what he was saying. I want you to have the blessings of God, but you need to fear me. He says that fear meaning reverence me. Think about me. The word says, remember the Lord your God. He just wants you to be, he wants to be remembered. Wants to be remembered. That's really what he wants to. He wants to be part. He wants to take part of your family. He wants to know that you have taken him in and that you have done him justice and that you walk with him and you talk with him and you bless him and you love him. See? Now, what happens with the money, that don't even think about that. Don't think about what the church does with it. Just don't even think about it right now. You can if you want to. In here at Center Church, we use the revenues, the tithes and the offerings that come into the church. We use it to take care of the facility that we have so we can continue to minister. We have people that come in on Tuesday from all over the valley and they worship God. We don't charge them rent. They tithe. We don't charge them rent. We have people that come in and have concerts and we're able to give them a discount of what it costs that covers the expenses of the church. There's other places that are charging $5,000, $8,000 for concerts. We give them a discount for concerts because we want them to bless the valley, and they bring in Christian concerts there at the church. It's a great facility. And there's others that will want to be part of this. And the video just blacked out. My camera just shut off. Don't know why. I'll find out why later, but it blacked out. I didn't go off the air. Sorry about that. Little technical difficulty. Please stand by. But we're able to do all these things because the people tithe. When Pipes break, we fix it. When something happens, we fix it. When something needs to be painted, we paint it. We do the best we can to be able to upkeep the building. And we're only able to do it by the tithes and offerings, gifts of faith, seed and sacrifices that are brought to the church. The blessings are coming from God. Your tithe is going to the house. He says, bring the tithe into the storehouse. That's the church. So that way there'll be meat in my house. That's you. You bring the tithe to the storehouse. The storehouse are for those who are out around the world that need Jesus. There'll be meat in your house, the house of God. You are the temple of the Holy Ghost. There'll be meat and provision in your house. That's what he's saying. In your house, you shall be blessed. So this is part 2 of is tithing for today. And there's going to be a part 3 tomorrow. I got more I want to share with you that I think will be a blessing. But